You know, some songs just slap. They just slap you right in your stupid face. And one of my favorite songs that does that is the song Leave No Stone by Canadian prog rock mogul Intervals. This song hits you like a sturdy yet polite freight train. So kick off your flip-flops and zip up your flannel, because we're headed to the Great White North for Tone School. I lovingly recreated this whole intro so that I could get some insight into how this song was mixed. And recreating a song like this is extraordinarily educational. So I'm going to show you how to do that to get a similar sound with a reasonable amount of effort. We're going to be reasonable with this effort. We're going to do a lot with a little. Here we go. And now that I'm done with my Aaron Marshall impression, I'm going to do my Simon Grove impression. But I'm not going to talk in an Australian accent for the rest of the video. That would be disrespectful. But I will show you how I mixed this thing. I recreated the drum performance in Modern and Massive 2 by Get Good Drums. To get the MIDI for this, what I did was I just watched a live performance video at half speed, and I meticulously recreated it like I was building the Sistine Chapel with toothpicks. I started with the preset Metal Monster, and I may have swapped out the snare. I'm too lazy to check, but I definitely tuned the snare down just a tiny bit, as well as all of the one-shot samples that you can use in Modern and Massive 2. The snare is being routed out to Logic, as are all of the multi-tracks in Modern and Massive 2, and I have a little bit of processing happening on those output tracks in Logic, but a lot of the bulk of the mixing I just did inside of Modern and Massive 2, because I started with a good preset. I just adjusted a few of the parameters. The big thing was going through all of the presets and finding one that matched the general vibe of the shells of this song. I didn't worry so much about the cymbals. So on my output snare track, I've got a transient designer, kind of shaving off a little bit of the sustain, and some EQ and compression, just to kind of make it pop a bit more. For the kick channel, I just high-passed it at 30 Hertz to clean up some of that sub, and I also have another kick that is being triggered from Trigger 2 from Slate Digital, and that is a sample that Morgan Tomaso from the band Cartoon Theory sent to me a while back. It just adds a little bit more thwack to the attack, and I like how that sounds. For the overhead in the room, I ended up high-passing at around like 500 Hertz or so. I found that the space of this opening is actually pretty dry. Like there's not a ton of like drum room in this intro, so I didn't want it to be overly like boomy and like full sounding in that sense and the reverby sense. I wanted it to stay tight and punchy. On the room track, I did add a little bit of Decapitator from Sound Toys, just a tiny little bit to kind of liven it some. On the drum bus, I'm using the Fairchild style compressor, the Verimu compressor from Slate Digital. FG Mu is what it's called. That's a great 2-bus compressor. You can use it on any stereo mix. And after that, I'm using the SSL channel strip from Waves, the E channel, and I'm adding a little bit of top end, a little bit of 200 Hertz just to kind of make it feel a little more polished. And then I'm running FG Gray really mildly, just kind of smoothing out the whole performance. And then the Pro L2 limiter, just with a preset I made for drum limiting, just to make sure that my snare and my toms don't poke too much and take away from the headroom on my master bus. For the bass track, I did consider using Umansky bass from Submission Audio, which is basically a sample of Jacob Umansky's playing. He's the bassist for Intervals, and I thought that would fit really well. But he wasn't the bassist on this record, so I was like, you know what, I'll just play it live on my Dingwall NG3, the wonderful turquoise machine that it is. And I love this bass, because it sounds like a garbage truck falling down a mountain. Glug, 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 glug. I'm using 3 layers of parallel processing for the bass. The first track is a clean foundational DI track that's been high-passed and low-passed, just to keep it honest. It's providing the primary intonation and clarity of the track. I do have it compressed with Pro C2, and I have it dipped out a little bit in the low mids just to kind of make sure it stays clean. I have a character track, and on the character track, I'm running Parallax and Saturn II. just to kind of saturate it a bit. And then I've got Soothe 2 on it to control the mids, make sure they don't get out of whack. I want to be really careful with that because I don't want unnecessary mids. I want nice sounding mids because the low mids are the secret to this mix. Spoiler alert. Then for my third track, I have a clank track, which is basically just a high pass and low pass copy of the DI signal that has a little bit of a mid boost. And then I'm absolutely obliterating it with compression. Then I'm blending it in just like a little tiny little bit just to give it more smack overall. Then I have all 3 of those tracks going to a bass bus where they're all getting compressed together in a nice little bass ball. And then I'm EQing out some of the harsh whistle tones in the upper mids, and I'm doing a kind of wide general boost to the low mids. That's like the real secret to this, right? I kind of spoiled it earlier, but the bass's low mids of this song, I think, is really the soul of this mix. So funny how it's actually the bass guitar that's making this whole mix really come together. Then I've got that going through a multi-band compressor chained to the kick drum, so it makes the bass behave like a good little bass. And then the whole thing is running through Space Designer, which is a reverb plugin that's stock to Logic, and that's adding just a little bit of width and a little bit of space and fullness. The guitar recording was interesting because I looked at the amps that Aaron used on this record and I compared the plugins that I had, and he used the Shure PT100 and the Mesa Boogie Triple Crown for some different textures, but nothing I had really fit exactly right. The PT100 is kind of like a British hot-rodded EL34 thing, and I was like, if only I had like a British-style hot-rodded EL34 amplifier that I could just use on this. I'm just going to use amp 2 of Archetype Gojira. Let's try that. And I did. And it sounded like dog water.
If you or a loved one have been injured by Archetype Gojira, you may be entitled to financial compensation.
I went through so many Neural DSP amps, and then I would go back and I'd consult the original recording, and I was like, this just isn't it. So I did the unthinkable, and I was like, I'm just going to use a real amplifier. A real amplifier. Real. And it sounded so good. I used the Bossy microaggressor for some front-end compression and the precision drive from Horizon Devices to tighten it up. And what do you know? You get a fantastic proper metal tone. Boring. That was only half the battle. I needed to figure out the speaker cabinet, and I was not going to use my little 112 Friedman cab. That is just for like rehearsals and stuff. I don't have like a 412, and I sold my 212 because I just never used it, and so I just used some IRs. I used an IR blend of GGD's Gold Stack greenback style speakers and the Cali oversized V30 Suite on the massive cab, and it sounded positively massive, as you would expect from the name. Once I had the guitars recorded, the shocking thing was how much top end I had to shave off. Like, Aaron's tone is extraordinarily focused, so controlling the harshness and the treble is like a really big part of getting this tone. I've got a low pass at 7500 Hertz, and I've got a high pass at 60, and a couple of cleanup notches just in the harsh upper mids. I always have to do that, it seems. And then I've got Soothe 2 there to dynamically tame some of the 3K area, and then I've got Pro Q gently shaving off the top end and dynamically controlling 3.5K, and then I've got a cut at around 584 to kind of clean it up a little bit, tighten it some. And after all that, I had a really strong starting point on the guitars. This is where I feel like I can start bringing up some frequencies in a musical way, and I can think of no better way to do that than throwing on an instance of Archetype Nolly in the dual mono mode and just using the EQ block here. And if you're familiar with this, it has a setting called Nolly's Mod, which has a very specific kind of EQ parameter. So I boosted some pleasant low end, a good bit at 400 Hertz for the fundamental of the guitar, and then have a bit of smack increased at 4.5K, and I tamed 1.5K and 8K, just a smidge. I sent all these guitars to a bus reverb, and I chopped up the regions in the spaces where I wanted absolute silence, just to make it really chuggy and crispy and djenty. And of course, I had to add a synthesizer track to add a little bit of that sizzle that you can hear in the original recording, and I put Decapitator on it to kind of give it some more life. On the master bus, I compressed all these tracks with FG Gray and FG Red, put it through a limiter, stabilized, EQ'd, and enhanced the stereo image, and that's it. After all of those hours of tender love and care, I am pleased to say that this mix sounds completely different than the original song. here's the problem. Source audio. And even though I have a bass and a guitar and a kick and a snare, every single one of my source tones is different from every source tone in the original track. So pretty much no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to duplicate it exactly. You start this whole endeavor as a fool's errand. You've failed before you've even begun when you're trying to recreate a mix like this. You've got compression, saturation, and EQ as the main weapons of a good mix. But it doesn't matter how much you EQ a snare drum, you're not going to make it sound like a dumpster getting hit by a baseball bat. Those are fundamentally different sounds. So even if I can find a snare drum that's close enough, there are too many variables to get an exact replica. But I think I got really dang close. And I think the song sounds good on its own, separate and apart from the original. And that was really the main goal, using the original as a reference to kind of help me sculpt the tone and understand. And that's what's important, not how can I sound like this band or that. It's how can you sound good on your own. But doing exercises like this can help you understand what is good and what you gravitate toward as a listener, so it helps you prepare better as a composer and a mix engineer. So I did this whole educational experiment because I wanted to understand how did Simon Grove mix the masterpiece that is The Way Forward by Intervals. That record really resonates with me, and it inspires me to create music in this style. If you want to make music in this style, and if you have any questions about my guitar and bass teaching or my mixing and mastering services, hit me up on my website at plantbassriffs.com or on Instagram. We can hang out and be goofy. I hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned something useful, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.